Okay, Alexander, so we have finally got some sort of agreement on an infrastructure bill, if you want to call it an infrastructure bill. I don't know why they call it an infrastructure bill. Anyway, we have an agreement for more spending, I guess. To me, that's it. An agreement for more spending. What do you make of this agreement now? And the printing press is just going to get ramped up. You know, they're just not going to stop. They are not going to stop. What do you make of this?
Well, absolutely, they're not going to stop. And by the way, that's why it passed. Notice that 13 Republicans voted for it. Now, if you want to know why 13 Republicans voted for it, ask yourself what this thing actually is. It's a slush fund. It's a way of circulating money through the system and getting it to all your favourite contractors and friends and donors and people like that. So it's not difficult to understand why some Republicans would vote for a thing like this and why the various factions in the Democratic Party eventually united behind it. Because even though some of them wanted an awful lot more than they got, and they will always want more, ultimately, if it comes down to a situation where everybody financially benefits, well, they will go for it. I mean, you never look for explanations in terms of the votes, especially those votes of those 13 Republicans. Never look for complicated explanations when graft provides the obvious one. I mean, that's the reality of it. I'm not suggesting, by the way, these people themselves have necessarily been taking money, but doesn't need to be them. It could be their friends, the lobbyists, their donors, all the people around them. I mean, that's the way this works. The one thing it won't do, the one thing it can't do, is change the infrastructure picture in the United States itself. And in fact, I'm gradually coming round to the increasing view that nobody believes that it will. I mean, this isn't even about that. Nobody thinks that. Nobody really assumes it.
No, it's not about that, but it is about spending. So it's not going to change the infrastructure situation in the United States, but it's going to definitely have an effect on the economic situation in the United States for a long, long time going forward. As a matter of fact, I hear that the progressive wing of the Democrats agreed to all of this because they have assurances that the Biden White House and the Nancy Pelosi side of things, the moderate side of things, will back an even bigger spending bill connected to this Green New Deal, pie in the sky, utopia stuff, which is around $5 trillion. So, I mean, how is this going to affect the current situation in the United States, economic situation? More inflation, higher prices. How is this going to play out?
More inflation and higher prices. I mean, you named it already. I mean, first of all, I mean, at the simplest level, if you're increasing the money supply, which you're going to be doing with this, or you're going to increase expectations that the money supply is going to grow, which you're also going to do with this thing, at a time when inflation is already rising, you're going to get more inflation. I mean, that's the nature of things. But you're doing this in the middle of a supply chain crisis, which, to be very clear, is already a product of your inflationary policies. So you're going to create a situation where demand grows at a time when the supply chain, is already stuttering to meet the demands of the already growing demand side of the economy. That's inevitably going to lead to inflation. But I don't think any of the major actors in this game are really worried about that anymore. I think it's become increasingly obvious to me that it's a fiction that any part of the US political class, well, not any part, I mean, they're the Ron Pauls and people like that. There are some sound money people still left in the United States. But the political class as a whole doesn't worry about inflation anymore. What it worries about is increasing funding, because that's the way the cracks get papered over. So the progressive wing wants more spending on its pet plot projects, its green bills and green policies. Now, of course, there's an ideological aspect to this. No doubt there are some sincere beliefs about this also. But to be very clear, there's also a whole raft of so-called business people, industrialists, so-called entrepreneurs who are heavily invested in green policies. And they're going to be, they want that. They want more push towards green policies because you have more electric cars, more windmills, more of that kind of thing. And, there are people who make those things. So they want more money on that. So that's one side of the equation, the progressive right wing, if you like. And then there's the other side, the people who are, in the construction industry. They want to spend money on building, on roads, on bridges and things of that, not necessarily going anywhere or doing anything very much. And of course, most of that money won't go anywhere to those bridges or roads or anything. It will bleed into other things. It will bleed into the pockets of people, because that's the way these kind of infrastructure programs always work. So you're gonna have both. Now, you aren't choosing one against the other. You aren't going to try and control the spending, because your priority is to keep all of these groups on side with you. So you give all of them what you want. And that's what they all agree with each other. So the situation at the moment is of a monetary escalator. All sides believe that they should spend more because they think they can. And as for inflation, well, that doesn't hurt them. It hurts other people.
Yeah, and once you start setting up all these different programs, and you get all these individuals and these institutions, feeding off of the government policy, off of the government trough, you're never going to be able to pry them off. I mean, whatever's going to be set up now in these new programs and in this new spending package, I mean, it's going to last now forever in perpetuity, because you're never going to be able to cut these programs down or get rid of them in 3, 4, 5 years. So you've just added so much more of an expense to the U.S. government that it's just absolutely crippling. I just don't understand. Why did you need a spending bill to begin with? Why did they need this? They didn't need to spend $1 trillion or $2 trillion or $500 million. This wasn't necessary.
Absolutely correct. Now, can I just discuss infrastructure in the United States? To be very clear, this isn't really an infrastructure bill. As I said, it's a slush fund. It's a way of circulating money around the system, which will help some people politically. That's what its real purpose is. But this whole business of infrastructure is hugely misunderstood anyway, because I think people look at China and look at the big roads and the railways and things of this kind. But China is a developing country. They didn't have that many roads once. It didn't have any railways. It's also, if you know about China, it's a huge country, but it's very dense where the concentrations are. So it makes sense to build high-speed rail, or at least it makes a certain sense to do that. The United States isn't like that. The United States is a much less, dense country in that respect. So you're not going to achieve, even if you did an infrastructure program like, say China does, you're not going to achieve the multiplier effect that you used to do in China, but increasingly don't do even there. All that's going to happen is you're going to be pouring water, if you like, on sand. It will just trickle through. It won't actually provide you with anything, because this is a misunderstanding of what the economy needs. Now, the economy needs, obviously, you do need to have roads in good repair. You do need to have bridges in good repair. You might not need many more of them, but in order to keep your infrastructure up to date and in repair, you need a healthy, sound economy. That means healthy, sound finances. That means a situation where the economy is run in a conventional way. Now, if you go back to the start of the year, we were coming out of the pandemic crisis with a steady growth in the economy. If you'd left that alone, you wouldn't have had either the supply crisis or the inflation crisis that we have now. There would have been adjustments, but things would have leveled out. And then in the normal course, as the economy recovered and the tax take grew, you would have had funding to do the necessary repairs to the roads and the airports and the railways and the bridges when and how that was needed. So that's how you do it. You don't centrally plan and try to impose a massive infrastructure program on the United States. That doesn't respond to the United States' needs at this time.
Yeah, but they had to get the money out to the people.
Well, they had to get. They had to get them. I mean, that's the key to this whole thing. They had to get the money out because that's how you keep all of these political factions in balance.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's gonna once again just gonna destroy the U.S. going forward. Stuff like this.
Well, you know, John Maynard Keynes, you know, the famous economist, he once said that the worst policy mistake any government can make is to debauch its currency. And it seems to me this is where we're heading. I mean, you know, I'm sorry to talk like that. Well, you know, I just don't like to. But if you wanted to pursue economic policies that are guaranteed a bad outcome, that will provoke inflation, a major inflation crisis, and which will ultimately undermine the position of the dollar, well, you are doing that. Now, can I just say, comparisons have been made with the 1960s, when a previous democratic administration did exactly the same thing. They had wars all over the world. They had a massive war in Vietnam. They had a massive infrastructure and spending program in the United States, the Great Society. That led to the inflation crisis of the 1970s, which took, you know, more than a decade to get on top of, and very tough action. But of course, the money the Democrats were spending in the 60s as a proportion to GDP was far lower than what we're seeing today. I mean, the numbers we're seeing now, I mean, put anything that was being talked about in the 60s in the shade. And it's not only that, but on the part of some people now, and including sections of the so-called economics profession, there is now an ideological bias towards ever greater spending. The belief that, you know, you can go on spending to infinity and nothing bad will happen. And you know, you read them, you can find these articles, economists in the New York Times and such places, they actually write it this way. Well, you know, it's an experiment in economic management, which is going to end very badly because it's not an experiment that's been thought through.
Yeah, there's also the ideological component with getting rid of the entire energy sector, which we saw Biden do on the very first day in office, and look at where that's taken the U.S. I mean, well, the ideology is crippling as well.
The ideology is crippling, and it's also crackers, because at the same time as they're taking steps against energy, you know, fossil fuels within the United States, what do? They come along and they ask the Saudis and the Qataris and the UAE and the Russians to increase production of fossil fuels. I mean, they want both things at the same time. They want the Russians and the Saudis to increase oil production and gas production in order to bring down prices. But at the same time, they're closing down their own production because they feel that there's some sort of they're on an ideological crusade about that too. So it's an attempt to reconcile opposites all the time, papering over the obvious problems by printing money in ever greater quantities. And that's what this infrastructure thing is all about. And as I said, it wins some people over because, as I said, when you have amounts of money on this scale circling around, inevitably that will mean that some people will want their hands in the pot, and that wins you votes, at least not perhaps electorally, because the voters are the people who are paying the bills, but it does win you votes in Congress, because to be straightforward about it, as I said before, always when there is an explanation, something can be explained by graft. Look no further, and what greater opportunity is there for graft than a $1.5 trillion infrastructure program.
Yeah, did you see the interview? I believe it was the energy secretary, where they asked her the question about OPEC and how the U.S. is not going to OPEC, and they're begging OPEC to help them out. And the interviewer was like, I think it was Bloomberg, and the interviewer was like, well, what are you going to do about this as the energy department? And she started laughing.
What is the Granholm plan to increase oil production in America?
Oh my God. That is hilarious. Would that I had the magic wand on.
I know.
She just started laughing.
I know.
And that just shows this is all about ideology. And she was just like, "Oh, you don't know how the world works." Like she's preaching to the American people. You're so, American people, you're so naive, and you just don't understand how the world works. And OPEC has this monopoly on energy and energy production, and oil production. I was just like, well. It's like the U.S. doesn't produce anything. The U.S. doesn't produce any oil, any natural gas, nothing. So it was. You could just see that this is a religious cult. It doesn't have anything to do with reality. It's a religious cult.
Absolutely, and of course, there's nothing more dangerous than stupid people who think they're clever. Can I just say that? I mean, that is in government. It's a recipe for disaster. So these people have these ideas. They have these very simple and banal ideas, and they think that if they just stick rigidly to them, all will be well, because that's how it's got to be, because that's what the old ideology says.
Very bizarre, yeah. If you wanted to deliberately destroy a country, well, they're going about it perfectly.
Absolutely. Completely agree. I completely agree. I entirely agree. I mean, I read in the British media, in the British press, an article about this in which it said that Xi and Putin are laughing. I don't think they're laughing. I think they're looking at all of this, and they have their heads like this, and their hands in their heads, and because of course this isn't easy. This isn't an easy situation for them either. It's creating all kinds of problems for them. But I mean, they must be looking at all of this, and they must be saying to themselves, the Americans have taken leave of their senses. There is a complete flight from reality, and what are we going to do? Because to some extent, we are caught in this runaway train, as everybody is.
Yeah, it's so bizarre to watch. It's like watching a football match, Alexander, and seeing seeing someone dribble the ball, take the ball to their own goal, and shoot it into their own goal, and you're like watching the TV, going, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Stop!" And they just keep on going forward until they just score an own goal. It's so bizarre to watch.
It's even worse than that, because of course it's doing that all the time, scoring goal after goal in your own goal, and then coming along and telling everybody, well, actually, you're playing 5-dimensional football. This is all some sort of clever strategy in order to win, because that's how it looks. That's how it must look to the outside world. As I said, people, governments, which I'm not saying that the people who run them are geniuses, but governments that are run around the world in a more conventional way, in China, in Russia, in Japan, in all sorts of places, they must be saying to themselves, what exactly is going on in Washington? This just doesn't make any kind of sense. The people there are going loopy.
I'm sure there's a ton of Americans who are watching this, just going,
"Well, of course,
what the hell are they doing?"
Well, of course they are. I mean, more and more Americans, and that's of course the great hope, because I mean, ultimately, and that's coming back to that program we did recently about the elections, the recent elections. I mean, many Americans are not, caught up in the flight. Exactly, in the flight of reality of their leaders. I mean, they're the people who have to go out and pay the higher prices, pay the higher taxes, see their businesses come under pressure, face all of those things. Those people live in reality, and they understand it.
Yeah, that's the point. I mean, everything was so bad for the past 2 years with the pandemic that you just got to be wondering, what the hell is my government doing?
The ideologues are in control, and that is a huge problem for the rest of us. It's a problem because ideologues have no interest in the lives of actual human beings. Ideologues care only about their theories, about the bright new future they are building. Human beings are just speed bumps on the way to utopia.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people in the US who are watching this program will agree with you. I mean, I don't know about crazy, but they must be feeling extremely. Some of them must be extremely concerned, and I'm picking my words very carefully. But the voting figures are starting to speak for themselves.
Yeah, the polling numbers show.
Our polling numbers are terrible. He's what now? 38% approval. I think it's the fastest fall.
That's a generous 38%.
It's a generous one, exactly. And they're saying, because that apparently was passed just before this infrastructure bill passed, and they think. There was some talk that this is going to solve the problem. It's going to make it worse. It's going to make it much worse. And, we have a brief uptick in the job numbers. And they think that's going to solve their problems. Again, it's going to make it even worse, actually. Because if you stimulate an economy all the time, of course you'll see upticks in job numbers. But it's the trend picture you have to look over. And the real trend picture you need to worry about at the moment are the inflation numbers, and they're looking very bad.
All right, we'll leave it there. I'm sure we'll be revisiting this story often. Okay, the Duran.locals.com, Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey, and SuperU. You'll find all our videos on those links down below, and the Duran shop. 10% off when you use the code REAL News. Take care.